The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sterile glow over the cramped grocery store. It was late on a Tuesday evening, the kind of night where time seemed to stretch endlessly, and the air carried the faint hum of refrigerators and distant chatter from shoppers lingering in the aisles. I was at the register, my fingers moving mechanically across the keypad as I scanned items for customers who barely looked up from their phones to acknowledge me. My name is Mia, and at 23, I had already learned that life wasn't about grand adventures or chasing dreams, it was about surviving paycheck to paycheck. The uniform clung uncomfortably to my skin, its polyester fabric stiff and unforgiving after hours of wear. My feet ached in shoes worn down at the soles, but I didn't dare complain, not here, not to him. The store owner, Mr. Caldwell, paced behind me, his sharp eyes darting between the cash registers and the dwindling stock on the shelves. He was a wiry man in his late 50s, with thinning hair and an unrelenting scowl etched into his face. His presence always made the room feel smaller, heavier, like the walls were closing in. He ran the store with an iron fist, demanding perfection from his employees while offering little more than disdain in return. Every mistake, no matter how small, was met with a biting remark or a thinly veiled threat about job security. Tonight, he hovered near my station, arms crossed, watching every move I made as if waiting for me to slip up. As the clock ticked closer to closing time, the flow of customers slowed to a trickle. Just when I thought the shift might end quietly, the automatic doors slid open with a soft whoosh. An elderly woman shuffled in, her frail frame wrapped in a threadbare coat that hung loosely on her shoulders. Her hands trembled as she clutched a tattered canvas bag to her chest, and her eyes darted nervously around the store before landing on the bakery section. Something about her stopped me cold, not just her appearance, but the way she moved, as though each step required monumental effort. She hesitated by the bread display, staring longingly at a single loaf of wheat bread before reaching out tentatively, only to pull her hand back as if burned. I felt it then, a tightening in my chest, a pang of recognition. Hunger, desperation, they weren't strangers to me. They lived in the shadows of my own life, whispering reminders of what it meant to scrape by. But this woman, there was something different about her. Vulnerable. Alone. And in that moment, I realized I couldn't look away. My heart raced as I watched her linger by the bread aisle, her trembling hands betraying the hunger she tried so hard to mask. Every instinct screamed at me to act, but my mind was a battlefield of doubt and fear. What would Mr. Caldwell do if he saw? Would he fire me on the spot? The thought sent a shiver down my spine, but it couldn't drown out the voice inside me urging me to help. This wasn't just about bread, it was about dignity. About seeing someone else's struggle and choosing not to turn away. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out from behind the register, my movements deliberate yet cautious. "Ma'am," I called softly, keeping my tone low enough not to draw attention. She flinched at the sound of my voice, her weathered face snapping toward me with wide, startled eyes. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us was heavy, charged with unspoken need and uncertainty. Then, slowly, she nodded, as if giving me permission to continue. "I noticed you looking at the bread," I said, forcing a smile despite the knot in my stomach. "Would you like me to grab one for you?" Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. Instead, tears welled in her eyes, glistening under the harsh store lights. She shook her head almost imperceptibly and whispered, "No, no, I can't." Her voice cracked, and she looked away, shame coloring her features. Before I could second-guess myself, I reached for the loaf of bread she'd been eyeing and held it out to her. "Please," I insisted, my voice steady now. "Take it. It's okay." Her gaze flickered to mine, searching for something, validation, perhaps, or reassurance. Finally, she accepted the bread with shaking hands, clutching it to her chest like a lifeline. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "God bless you," but the relief I felt was short-lived. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught movement, Mr. Caldwell striding toward us, his jaw clenched and his eyes blazing with fury. My pulse quickened as he stopped just a few feet away, his piercing stare boring into me. "What do you think you're doing?" he barked, loud enough to make both of us flinch. The old woman took a step back, clutching the bread tighter as if bracing for punishment. I saw she needed it," I stammered, my throat dry. "She didn't have any money, Anne." "And you thought it was your place to give away my merchandise," he interrupted, his voice dripping with venom. "This isn't charity, Mia. This is a business." He snatched the loaf from the woman's hands, ignoring her quiet gasp of protest. You don't get to decide who eats and who starves. That's the plain and simple. It wasn't theft, I shot back, surprising even myself with the defiance in my tone. It was kindness. You wouldn't understand. His face turned crimson, veins bulging in his neck. Kindness doesn't pay the bills, he spat. And neither will you. Not anymore. Consider yourself fired, effective immediately. The words hit me like a punch to the gut, leaving me breathless. Around us, a few remaining customers paused, their curious glances adding to the weight of humiliation pressing down on me. The old woman reached out, her frail hand brushing against my arm. I'm so sorry, she whispered, her voice trembling. This is my fault. No, I said firmly, meeting her gaze. It's not. Don't apologize for needing help. As she turned to leave, clutching her empty bag, I felt a surge of anger, not at her, but at the world that forced people like her to choose between pride and survival. And at myself, for being powerless to change it. The walk home was a blur of cold wind and swirling thoughts, each step heavier than the last. My hands were shoved deep into the pockets of my jacket, but they did little to shield me from the biting chill or the storm brewing inside me. Fired. The word echoed in my mind, relentless and suffocating. It wasn't just the loss of a paycheck, it was the unraveling of the fragile stability I'd fought so hard to build. Rent was due in 2 weeks. My phone bill was overdue. The meager savings I'd managed to scrape together would barely cover groceries for the month, let alone everything else. Panic clawed at my chest, but beneath it lay something darker, shame. Shame for letting myself believe I could make a difference, however small, without facing consequences. When I finally reached my apartment, I slumped onto the couch, staring blankly at the cracked plaster ceiling. The room felt smaller than usual, the walls closing in as the reality of my situation sank in. I replayed the scene at the store over and over in my head, dissecting every detail, the way Mr. Caldwell's voice had risen above the hum of the fluorescent lights, the way the old woman's trembling hands had clutched that loaf of bread, the way the other customers had stared, their expressions an unreadable mass of judgment or pity. Each memory cut deeper than the last, leaving me raw and exposed. A knock at the door startled me out of my spiraling thoughts. My heart leapt, half expecting it to be Mr. Caldwell, come to deliver some final blow. Instead, it was Mrs. Patel, my elderly neighbor from down the hall. She stood in the doorway, her silver hair tied neatly in a bun and a steaming casserole dish cradled in her arms. I heard what happened, she said softly, her voice tinged with concern. Thought you might need this. Tears pricked my eyes as I accepted the dish, gratitude warring with embarrassment. Thank you, I managed, my voice thick. But how did you? Word gets around, she said with a knowing smile. People care, Mia. Even if it doesn't always feel like it. Her words lingered long after she left, a small but stubborn ember of hope amidst the wreckage of my day. That night, sleep eluded me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the old woman's face, the gratitude in her eyes, the way she'd whispered, God bless you, was it worth it? I wondered. Had my act of kindness truly made a difference, or had it only served to highlight my own powerlessness? The questions gnawed at me, relentless and unanswered, until exhaustion finally pulled me under. The night stretched on, heavy with the weight of my thoughts, until another unexpected knock shattered the stillness. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. Who could it be at this hour? Peering through the peephole, I saw a tall figure standing in the dim hallway light. His suit was impeccably tailored, his posture commanding, and his expression unreadable. My stomach churned with unease. Was this some kind of prank? Or worse, had Mr. Caldwell sent someone to intimidate me further? The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sterile glow over the cramped grocery store. It was late on a Tuesday evening, the kind of night where time seemed to stretch endlessly, and the air carried the faint hum of refrigerators and distant chatter from shoppers lingering in the aisles. I was at the register, my fingers moving mechanically across the keypad as I scanned items for customers who barely looked up from their phones to acknowledge me. My name is Mia, and at 23, I had already learned that life wasn't about grand adventures or chasing dreams, it was about surviving paycheck to paycheck. The uniform clung uncomfortably to my skin, its polyester fabric stiff and unforgiving after hours of wear. My feet ached in shoes worn down at the soles, but I didn't dare complain, not here, not to him. The store owner, Mr. Caldwell, paced behind